In this video, I'm going to show you step by step on how I map using the inked thread method. For the sake of this video, I'm using a ruler, but ideally you're using an inked thread to make these lines. So here is the first measuring point, and we want to make sure it's going down exactly the center of the face. This is going to be the most important. So make sure you're getting it right in between their nose. Many times I'm using the Cupid's bow in the center of the chin and right between both eyes. The second measuring point is going to be to find where the eyebrow is going to start at the head of the brow, and you want to make sure it's right where the tear duct starts. Now this can change depending on where the client's natural growth begins and ends, but for today's tutorial I'm just going to show you ideally where we'd want to place it. So I want to talk about how my client is positioned when I'm making these initial vertical lines. The center line is probably going to be the most important because we're going to use that as our beginning measuring point for the other lines, and you'll see that here. But I have my client laying down flat while I'm making these 3 vertical lines, and then when I typically start doing the other lines, I'll bring her up and sit her facing me, and I'm right in front of her face. So when I'm making these 3 lines, I'm hovering above them and they're lying flat on their back, and then I bring them up and have them sit up completely straight, and I'm straight on facing them while I'm making the other lines. So the reason I have erased that line at the head of the brow there is because it was just a little bit off, and when you see me move the ruler, I'm measuring from the center point to each of the lines, and I want to make sure that it's exactly the same distance. So let's say you don't get this measurement correct, and one line is a little bit further pushed out than the other at the head of the brow. That means when you do fill in these eyebrows, one side is going to come a little further in on the inside of the brow than the other, and it's very, very obvious. So we just want to make sure we're getting this perfectly aligned and perfectly correct. I also do want to know I'm using calipers to measure when I'm doing this with ink thread, and it's a lot quicker. So what it looks like is you're holding the inked thread taut in between your fingers. You're using your index fingers to wrap that around, and you're using your thumbs to push it forward to make these lines. And then when you're measuring, it's a lot quicker because ideally you're just using calipers or some kind of malleable ruler, and then you can just hold it up and make these little revisions that I'm making here a lot quicker. The fourth measuring point that I'm going to demonstrate here is to figure out where we want our arches to sit on the eyebrow. So I'm measuring right at the bottom, the center of the Cupid's bow, and I'm going directly through the center of her pupil and then making that line all the way above the eyebrow. So again, just to reiterate, relying on that center line there, that it is exactly at the center of their face, because that's going to be our guide for the placement of every other line in this video. We have one side down. Now I'm going to move in on the other side to figure out where that arch should be placed. And again, I'm using the center point of that line right at the Cupid's bow, and I'm going through the center of her pupil all the way up through the eyebrow. I'll draw a little dot here so you can see exactly the point that I'm using to create all these other guidelines. So the next lines I'm going to do here is to figure out where the eyebrow should end, or where the tail of the eyebrow should finish. I'm going through the center of the Cupid's bow and then going to the corner of the eye. So if you see, like, right where the eye ends, Cupid's bow all the way up through the eyebrow is where we want that line to be. Now that we've established those 2 guidelines, now we're going to take some measurements. So we are going to measure the arch line and measure the distance between the arch line and where the head of the brow is going to be. We're going to measure one side and compare it to the measurement of the other to make sure that that is spot on. This is going to ensure that both arches fall as symmetrically as possible on the face. Now you're going to see me take these measurements here, and honestly, many times you are going to find that the lines may be a little bit off, and that's absolutely okay. You can make adjustments, and again, it's a lot quicker when you're using ink thread and calipers because you can quickly dip a Q-tip or a cotton swab in a little bit of water, wipe off the line, and then redo it. So here it was a tiny bit off, so I'm just going to make the slightest adjustment. These little adjustments go a long way when you're working on a live client. So even if it's a little bit off and to your eyes it looks symmetrical, but when you're measuring you find out it's not, make that adjustment. These little things make all the difference. So we measured that, made that adjustment. They are perfect now, so let's measure where the tail should end. So now I'm measuring from the beginning of the brow, or those two outside lines, to the line that we made for the tail, and I measured it and that was spot on, so no adjustments need to be made there. So let's move on to the next step. The next thing I'm going to do is figure out how thick we want to make these eyebrows, and that measurement is going to start with the head of the brow. She has growth, so I'm going to incorporate her natural growth in this shape, and many times the eyebrow hair is going to start, if you feel it's right where there's a divot, like where our orbital socket ends. We're going to make a horizontal line right where we want the head of the brow, the very bottom. This is what this is establishing, so we want that line to go straight across. Once we've gotten that, we're going to move on to the top, and again we're just making a line straight across, and this is going to be the top of the head of the eyebrow. Once we get that measurement, again I'm using her natural growth, which is really convenient here, but then we're going to get the top of the arch. So that's going to go, again, a horizontal line right across the top of the arch. I like to pay attention to where their growth ends. What I did here is I just extended the bottom of the head of the brow because we're going to use those lines as well. Now that we've established all our guide points, we are going to start connecting the dots here, and I'm literally going to dot those little tiny red dots, and that's how we're finding the upper line that's going to build the shape of the eyebrow. What I'm doing is making a line that's going to create the top of the head of the brow to the very top of the arch, and then I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm dotting them there. You can see those small dots, and we want to make sure that they create an X, that they cross at exactly the same point at our guideline in that center point there. So if you see, I'm creating an X right in the center when I cross these lines, so it's very important to kind of extend them out to make sure they cross at that center line exactly at the same point. What I'm doing here is creating these little red dots under the top of the arch so you can see what I'm looking at when I create that bottom line under the eyebrow. So again, we have our guidelines, now we're just connecting the dots. So I'm going to connect the dot at the bottom of the head of the brow to what is going to be the bottom of the arch. And again, we're going all the way through that center line to make sure that it's creating an X right in that center point again. And I think I go back and just extend it here to make sure that we can see that. There we go. Now I am doing the same thing on the other side, and excuse me, I'm starting to lose my voice because I've re-recorded this so many times. But again, we're just getting that bottom line that's going to create the eyebrow from the bottom of the head to the bottom of the arch. Those little red dots, I created those for visual purposes so you can see exactly what I'm using. Now we just need to build out the tails, but I wanted to quickly touch on why I extended that bottom line right at the bottom of the head of the eyebrow. I extended them outwards because we never want to make the tails go lower than the head of the brow. So whenever we're building out the tails, we never want to make them go lower than that very bottom line, that very bottom horizontal line that you see drawn there. And so I will always extend it just to make sure that I'm not passing it, because healed, or if we're referring to lamination and tint, it just gives a very droopy look. It doesn't look good on anyone. So look at those tiny red dots again. I'm going from the top of the arch to where the very tip of the tail should be, and I'm crossing the center line there because again we are making an X when we're doing this. I'm going from that little dot to the bottom of the arch, that little dot at the end of the tail, going right through it to the little dot, the little red dot that was at the bottom of the arch, going right through that and crossing that center point line there. And then we're just going to do the same thing on the other side. And again, we want to make sure that those lines cross and create a perfect X at the center so we can ensure that we're creating the most symmetrical shape possible. Now there can be like small little asymmetrical features, but not everyone's face is symmetrical. We want to come as close to twins as possible. But eyebrows are always sisters, not twins, and that's something that I hear used in this industry all the time. But we do want to make them as close to twins as possible. Okay, so we have established the eyebrow shape. I know many can't see it, so I'm going to go ahead and trace it with a blue line here, and I will fill it in so you can get a good idea of what that would look like with this new eyebrow shape. Now, I will say that this is my favorite, the inked thread method, along with a caliper or malleable ruler that you can kind of bend over the face. This is my favorite method. I've just found that it's never steered me wrong. It's really quick once you learn how to establish all of these lines and measure them to make sure they're the same distance on both sides of the face. But there are different mapping methods out there, so I would encourage you to do your research. Again, this is my favorite, and I find it really, really easy and quick. I promise once you master this, it's going to be game-changing for you. But go ahead and do your research. Let me know what you think of this video, and let me know if you have any questions. And here I just jotted the last checkpoint that I do when mapping. Thanks, guys.